Welcome to Grief in Media, a podcast where we laugh, cry, feel seen in our grief, and everything in between. I'm your host, Alex Piscatelli. Let's get into it. Welcome to Grief in Media. I am so excited for this episode. When I decided to do a podcast for Grief in Media, this was like the first episode idea I had. We're going to be talking about Ariana Grande. But before we get into exactly what we're going to talk about, I want to introduce our guest of honor, Mikey Levitt. Welcome to Grief in Media.
Oh my God, so happy to be here. Wow. First recording. This is going to be a mess. I love it.
Yes, how are you doing? Are you ready to talk about all things Ariana?
Oh my God, I do it every day. Might as well record it. Come on.
And I feel like it's great because the way we met like 5 or 6 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, on a dating app.
Yeah,
was it? I feel it was in 2018 for sure.
I think it was because I think you were like one of the first people I met off an app when I was living in California. Like, I think I just moved to California. Yeah.
I feel like we bonded because I'm pretty sure it was, I think for Halloween, well, for sure for Halloween, I dressed up as Ariana Grande. And yes. I think it was on my app, or it was some situation where like either one of us or both of us had Ariana on our Hinge profile in some capacity. And I think that's what like half of our conversations were about.
I distinctly remember us chatting on Hinge for all of like 5 minutes. And then one of us was like, this is a platonic friendship. Let's go to Olive Garden and talk about Ariana. And like, that was it. Like it was like very to the point. We like went on a friend date to Olive Garden. We scarfed down like endless salad and breadsticks and soup. And we talked about Ariana for like 4 hours. And I haven't seen you in like 6 years.
The fact that we went to Olive Garden too, I didn't even remember that detail. And I'm very glad you brought that up because that tracks. It fully tracks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This was before I like discovered lactates too. So I was like really just in a ton of pain that night. Yeah, it was a great time. I had a great time.
Now that we're talking about it too, I remember, I feel like I really wanted to set one of my friends up with one of your friends, and I don't think that ever happened, but
no, I don't think we ever did that.
I don't think we ever did that. They are not Ariana fans though, or at least my friend isn't. Well, no, he went to the concert with me. I guess that's unfair to say, but he's not like as much of a fan as I am.
I don't even remember who I was talking about at the time, so it's all good.
Awesome. So we are going to be talking about Ariana Grande. And the reason for that is because what I love we're both obviously huge fans of her. And what I love so much about her is that, as a lot of musical artists, we've seen them kind of grow up and grow into their own more. But, when Eternal Sunshine just came out this year, like you and I had messaged each other about it. And I looked back at our last messages and we talked about positions in the same way too. And we're like, oh my God, this is wonderful. And the way she talks about blah, 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 blah. And what I love so much about Ariana Grande is not only there's the nostalgia factor, but there's also, this lens of life experience that a lot of her music talks about and showcases. And what I loved Sweetener, and I know we'll get into that because I love Sweetener and I want to obsess about it. But with Sweetener, it came at this time where a year before the Manchester bombing had happened. And I know her grandfather had died. I'm not sure exactly what year, but a lot of that music was coming out of this space of PTSD and anxiety and grief. And then, of course, Thank You Next came after Mac Miller died. And this album, this most recent Eternal Sunshine album, came after her divorce. So I really wanted to talk about Ariana Grande because so much of her work is informed by grief and this life experience. But before we really dive into that, I want to ask you your personal relationship with Ariana Grande. Like, what is it about her? What made you a fan originally?
Oh, man. Well, this goes back to like 2010 or something. Like I saw Ariana Grande, like most of us did, on Victorious, and I think it was definitely among the clips of like, she didn't say I couldn't sing or whatever.
Yes.
That I remember being like, wow, she actually has a really good voice. And then she posted that Emotion cover by Mariah Carey on YouTube. And that was when I started getting all in on Ariana. And it just kind of continued. And I loved Ariana in high school, loved her in college, love her as an adult now. I'm talking about the music. I don't know if we can get into the person, but I'm talking about the music. But her music has always been music, like every album, top to bottom, maybe with the exception of My Everything, has
Mhm.
always been albums that I've always loved. They've always been at the right time period for me. I've felt as if she was an artist that I just continued to grow up with, and her music was always fitting for the phase of life I was in. So I think that's part of the reason why I've just always felt so connected to her. Outside of the music is also just really good. Like it's objectively really good music. So that's probably my relationship with her.
Yeah, so I want to discuss that a little bit more because you said how like these albums hit at these exact right times in life for you. Can you talk about that more? We'll talk more about Eternal Sunshine in a bit, but with other albums, are there specific ones that you can think of that you're like, okay, this one really stands out for that point of time for me?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they all, to an extent, have their place in my life. I think yours truly, that debut album, I remember editing my film submission, like my film school submission video, with Honeymoon Avenue playing in the background. Um, that album, I don't know if it had just came out, but that was when I was discovering myself, finding my personality. And that album was super upbeat and poppy. And it was it's one of the first albums I can remember feeling like, oh, this is one of my favorite albums, listening top to front. And then, Sweetener came right at that time where I was exiting college, going into adulthood. And then coincidentally, Thank You Next was that big divorce breakup album. I don't know, was she divorced? No, they broke up.
Hmm.
Or maybe they
Yeah,
were.
engagement
Again,
ending.
look, her dating history, it still throws me for a loop. But, and then that was at a point where I transitioned into adulthood, moved to LA, and it was this transitional period in my life where nothing seemed to be going right. And it just was every single time she released an album, it was just this weird coincidence that the songs she was making and the things that she was going through, it always felt like I was going through something similar to a much lesser extent, obviously. But that was kind of why I just stuck with her. So yours truly, My Everything, I don't have that feeling with, to be
Mhm.
quite honest. Sweetener, Thank You Next, absolutely. And then Positions, I love. I didn't have a super big connection, but Eternal Sunshine. I mean, coming out of the darkness into the light, that's kind of how I feel. Like it came out in a
Right.
point where I actually feel like I have a life now, have a friend circle, a good job. Everything's mellowed out, found peace within yourself. So kind of that's how it's been for me with her albums.
Yeah, it's funny because it's funny what you say about Sweetener, especially specifically, because for me, that was also, I mean, I think we graduated college the
Mhm.
same year and I also moved to LA. And I think like I look back at 2018 and when I think of my life then, I think of like REM playing on repeat when I'm driving from LA back home to San Diego. Like
Yep.
I remember playing that song truly for 2 hours straight because I just loved it so much. And I think it helped me a lot with that transition of like, okay, now I'm kind of like supposed to be an adult, but I don't feel that way. And I'm living in this new place and it's very weird. But it also added to like the whimsy of adulthood too, in a way.
Hmm.
Cause I think that when I think of that album, I think of like coming out of the clouds, I guess, but then like not knowing what life has ahead of you.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that perfectly encapsulates it. Like you said,
Yeah.
Sweetener, I remember listening to Breathe In, uh, driving from the Uber from LAX to the hotel I had booked for 2 days. No job, no prospects. I knew two people here. And I remember playing that album in my earbuds while I was here. So very similar. It was this album that I felt perfectly encapsulated how I was feeling at the time. And yeah, coming out of the clouds, and you really have no idea where you're going or what you're going to do. And that kind of is the crux of what Sweetener was for her. She was just happy. She was happy. She didn't
Right.
really care what was happening next. It was just an album talking
Definitely.
about how happy she was.
Definitely. And how do you feel like she stands out for you compared to other artists? Because there are other artists that, like you think of like a Miley Cyrus, or you think of, I don't know, I'm trying to think who else we like grew up sort of watching, and then they're still present in music and in entertainment. What is it about her and her music specifically that stands out for you in these moments of growing up?
I I think with Ariana, it's that the sound is always changing to an extent. Obviously she's a pop singer, but and plenty of her songs have very similar sounds. I'm a realistic stan here, but she weaves through pop, R&B, even hip hop to an extent. She's always evolving her sound. So Ariana to me has always stood that kind of test of time as we've grown up, because you never really know what you're going to get with her albums. You don't. Eternal Sunshine, she releases Yes and you kind of think it's going to be this dance club album. And then she releases it, and Yes and is probably the most upbeat song on that album, in my opinion, at least. I did
Mhm.
not expect Eternal Sunshine to be what it was. So it's that she's always surprising us. She's always keeping us on our toes. And even, and again, talking about her as a person, when you are that kind of celebrity that has these kind of controversies and you are unapologetically yourself and you don't apologize to anyone for the things that you have done, you stay relevant in our heads, music or not. Um, Whether or not that's a good thing can be up for debate. But that's kind of with Ariana. It's always been that anytime she's releasing music, I don't know what I'm going to get from her. So my interest is constantly piqued every 2 years. So she always draws me back in.
Right, definitely. And I think, you touched on something that I'm really interested in talking through a bit, because you said, you don't know what to expect, and that includes like
Hmm.
her being this unapologetic herself, and it comes with controversies. And I think you and I both are fine criticizing our
Hmm.
fave at the same time.
Absolutely.
Um but I think about like someone like Taylor Swift, and she's someone who, and before any Swifties say anything, I
I
do
was
like
going to
Taylor
say,
Swift.
Alex, this is dark territory you're going
I
down.
know. I'm getting in a very scary place, but I did go to Eras. Let me be clear.
All right.
Reputation is one of my favorite albums, but I think when it comes to Taylor Swift, she has this sort of squeaky clean image. Like it's very curated. She has the tree pain of it all. Her PR person. She's very, very, and then the music she puts out. Okay, I'm gonna say it. The newest album, oh shoot, what's it called? Tortured Poets,
Hmm.
whatever. That newest one, I did not feel a connection to. There are certain songs I did like, but it felt very
Hmm.
long. It felt very, okay, let's keep the people, like the rate at which she releases albums. It's like, okay, let's keep people's interest, and let's keep people's interest the way we want to keep it, versus like Ariana, you sort
Right.
of don't know what to expect from her. Um and I do think that makes, I mean, maybe I'll have to ask a Swifty, but I do think that sort of not knowing what to expect makes you like her stuff better in ways.
I think it does. I mean, with again, I don't want to offend the Swifties out there, but with Taylor Swift, I mean, Torture Poets Apartment, it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was. I'm not saying
Right.
it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I agree. I was kind of neutral to it, but it was what I thought it was going to be. Whereas, yeah, with Ariana, I never have a clue what it is she's going to release. I never have a clue. I remember uh, Sweetener. If we go all the way back to Sweetener, I think one of the first singles was Breathin', I think. And Breathin' was a great song that got overplayed very quickly. Overplayed very quickly. But then the second song on that album, or maybe it's the first, is Blazed, which is a completely
Mhm.
different sound from Breathin'. And again,
Right.
it was one of those moments where the singles aren't matching what is on the album. It was always keeping us on our toes. And I think that's why Ariana fans are always drawn back to her, even when she takes those 3 year hiatuses. And it's like I said, with me and Ariana, I will always say, hey, you may not like this album. I said that about Eternal Sunshine. Like, you may not like this album because you have to be in a very specific place in your life and mindset to enjoy some of these songs. And
Right.
that's not me necessarily projecting. I've talked to some of my friends who are like, yeah, I can't listen to Don't Want to Break Up Again. I'm probably butchering the names of these songs, but that don't want to listen to that because of places they are in their life.
Right.
And that's the thing with Ariana is I think you have to want to follow the mindset that she's going down when you're listening to these albums. Whereas I think artists like a Taylor, or even, yeah, I'm gonna throw some other fandoms into here, Taylor, Dua Lipa, Sabrina Carpenter, those are artists that I do feel their music, which I love, is a little predictable to an extent. Is sometimes predictable.
Right, that's fair. Though love Sabrina.
Love
She's my
Sabrina and
second
love
fave.
Dua. I love both of them. Okay.
Totally. No, I agree. And I think I'm curious, when you've talked with your friends about, you have to sort of be in that at that right place and that right mindset to listen to Eternal Sunshine. What mindset, like if you had to sort of categorize that, what would you say? And what do you say to your friends when you talk about it?
It's interesting because for me, listening to Eternal Sunshine, I didn't necessarily have a super emotional reaction to a lot of the heavier songs. And talking to one of my best friends about it, who is, single, kind of not really looking for a relationship, those songs hit him deeper than they hit me. And we kind of started talking about it, and it became clear. It was like her album is about how she's finding peace within herself, how she's Eternal Sunshine. She's finding, I'm going to use the album name in the podcast. She's using it's she finds her eternal sunshine, right? So with that, for me, it was really that I've been in a place in my life where I went through the darkness, in my opinion, of living in Los Angeles, not really bouncing from job to job, and then, been lucky enough to get into a great relationship, move in with my partner, settle down, find, groups of friends that made me feel like I had purpose here. But, then talking to my friend, he's like, well, I'm not really looking for a relationship, but it would be nice to have one, but I just haven't found that yet. So songs like that, the deeper, more emotional songs, that it didn't necessarily resonate with me because I'm just not in that place in my life. Whereas for him, he is.
Definitely. As you were saying that too, I was sort of thinking of, because I think this album hit me a lot, not particularly for the relationship stuff. I was telling my husband Jack the other day. I'm like, you know what? I think I've had some like pretty big life experiences, but one I have not experienced is like heartbreak of a relationship ending. Like I have not really experienced anything of that sort, but I think sort of heartbreak through grief, like I sort of connected with this album in ways, not necessarily the exact same thing, but thinking of it in that way. But and then I feel like Sweetener, Thank You Next are ones that were really prominent for me. And though I love Positions, I do feel like there wasn't as much like emotions that I connected with in Positions. And I'm curious right now if you think that's one that doesn't like hold as many deep feelings and is supposed to be a sort of like, I don't know, like upbeat thing during the time of COVID, because that was like deep lockdown. I'm curious what that album you think its sort of intended purposes were.
I mean, Position, she was horny. Like, like, I mean, you know, to be blunt, like that's how I always viewed it. Was Positions came out, yes, it was kind of during this time, kind of similar to how her and Gaga released Rain on Me. Club banger, that was right, that was well before anyone was vaccinated. Something that people could enjoy. I played that 50 times in a row within the first like 24 hours because there was nothing else. People weren't really putting out that much music. I mean, it was before that, I think we had Future Nostalgia, which great album.
Oh yeah, that was like March 2020, I
That
feel
was
like.
right at the peak of that was beginning of the
Like
pandemic.
yeah, day one, like ground zero. It
Yes,
was like
yes.
immediate, yeah.
And that album did save me. I won't lie. Like that was, I mean, I love that album. But I think with Positions, it really was almost a continuation of Thank You Next to an extent. Because I always felt like with Positions, you could have taken a lot of those songs and put them on Thank You Next and it would have worked. So it always to me felt like Positions was an album that, regardless of pandemic or not, she was going to release at the same time, because those were songs, in my opinion, that were in the vault. She had those locked and loaded, kind of ready to go. So it wasn't surprising to me when Positions came out, but I didn't feel, outside of POV, my favorite song on the album,
Love that one.
outside of POV, that album didn't resonate with me as like an emotional crutch. Like I always felt like that album was her just kind of doing a continuation of Thank You Next. She was still in that kind of post heartbreak, it's me against the world personality. And that was a result of it. And in addition, she was single and ready to get out there. That to me was how that album felt. Maybe if there was no pandemic, I would have felt differently about that album. But because I was inside, it was kind of like emotions were a little numb. Like I was a little numb to the outside world and emotions at that point. So because I think that came out like November of 2020.
Yeah, I believe so.
And I think by that point, I was really, I don't think I had seen anyone. I don't think, I don't think I had really even thought about Ariana since Thank You Next. So when it came out, I was kind of just feeling like, well, like emotionally, I'm a little numb because I haven't had human interaction in months. So I can't fully absorb this album, but I can tell that this is definitely a continuation of Thank You Next based on the content of the songs.
Definitely. I'm curious too, now that we're talking about like the COVID and the pandemic of it all, what Ariana music were you finding yourself revisiting in those sort of like very lonely stay at
Oh,
home times?
oh, Yours Truly. I went back to Yours Truly a lot during the pandemic. I think because Yours Truly was the album from high school when I was 16, 17 years old, I think. And that, as I said earlier, that was around the time I was finding my personality, finding the things I liked, finding the people that I wanted to be around, kind of as I was starting to grow up into adulthood. So for me, I was going back to that album honestly as like a dopamine release, trying to find like some semblance of happiness and normalcy, and connection. And truthfully, trying to feel connected to my family, my friends. That album holds so much weight for me in that regard, that I was constantly listening to that, specifically piano. I don't know why, but
Mm-hmm.
I had piano on repeat during the pandemic.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think for me, it's funny because I didn't become a huge fan of her until like 2018, like when God is a Woman came out, like
Sure.
because I think that was before Sweetener. I think that was one of the singles. I was like, yeah, no, like I'm gonna stand, like
Yeah.
it's decided, like immediately after the song. And but like my favorite Ariana song of all time, though, now I might say Intro End of the World is in my top 3. I don't know if it's my number 1, but it's in my top 3. But
Interesting.
the other one in my top 3 is Honeymoon Avenue. And I think even though that one was on repeat like 2018, 2019, I think it still reminds me of really good times amid the hard times that I had in 2018. No, what's funny too. So I did not. I wasn't huge on like Victorious and like all the Nickelodeon shows. Like I loved like Fairly Odd Parents and SpongeBob, but then once it got to like the like actual human shows, like I was more Disney than
Sure.
Nickelodeon. But I worked at AMC, like the movie theater. That was my first job. And I remember like when we would have to clean the theater after like a movie, there would be at AMC, it would be like spotlighting brand new artist Ariana Grande with Baby I, and it would be like a little snippet of the Baby I song. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I hate listening to this. Like I am in cleaning this movie theater and I hate to do it. But it's funny because now that song is just very happy for me. So it's just funny to like look back at where we were when different things came out too.
Oh, Baby I is that is a top. I maybe not 5, but that could be a top 10 Ariana Grande song. It is so good. I also
Oh,
remember that you once told me that Make Up from Thank You Next was like one of your top songs. And I still to this
Yes.
day think that is crazy. I think that is absolutely insane. That was my least favorite song from that album. I'm not
Are you
even kidding.
kidding?
I'm not kidding.
Oh no.
That was my least favorite song.
It is so good. It's really funny because like in the past like month, I was like looking at old, like me and Jack were looking at old like videos and stuff on my phone, and I saw me from like the Sweetener Thank You
Yeah.
Next concert, and I'm recording her singing Makeup, and you just hear me like screaming and being like singing along with the lyrics, but like fully screaming. I love it. I think the reason why, and I think this is why I love someone like Sabrina Carpenter, I just love like a silly fun song, like amid like deeper songs. I love a silly fun one. So that's why I love Makeup.
Espresso? That's a great song.
Absolutely.
Mindless banger. Like, you just throw that on. I don't know the lyrics. I've listened to it like 100 times. I have retained no lyrics, but it's great. It's a great song.
Well, the best,
I do understand that.
I'm working late because I'm a singer. That's all you need to know.
That's all I need to know. Like, don't get me wrong. I understand why Makeup is so high. Like, I do get it. I get it. It just, for me personally, I could never.
Wait, so I'm curious what your top 3 to 5 are of Ariana's.
Oh God, let me pull up Spotify real quick. Jeez.
Because I can easily drop my top 3. I don't think I could do my top 5 super easy, but I can tell you my top 3. It's for sure Honeymoon Avenue, Intro, End of the World, and REM are my top 3.
That's honestly a very good top 3.
Thank you.
I feel like for me, I'm looking at Spotify right now. Okay, definitely I have to put Be Alright up there.
Okay, yes.
Be Alright. This is probably like a top 5 in no particular order. But Be Alright is definitely on there for me. I would probably say definitely POV. I love POV.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to that whenever I'm sad. Thank You Next. Thank You Next, I would probably say Break Up With Your Girlfriend on Board. It's just so good. Also, it samples NSYNC.
Really? Okay.
It samples NSYNC, and I'm such like a huge NSYNC fan. Like, I die for NSYNC. Okay, You'll Never Know, I might put up there. I'm going to totally regret this when this podcast comes out, because I'm not, like, I'm going to be like, that is not my top 5 at all.
I know, you're going to have to release a statement.
No, like, it's actually like definitely not this is definitely not what's going to stick, but I would say I can't pick a 5th. That's 4.
Yeah, I feel like 5 is too difficult. Like, I don't know what I would put as 4 and 5 if I had to continue it.
It depends on the day for me, honestly. Some days I'm really into certain songs.
No, same. I know. Now I'm honestly, do I want to, hold on. I feel like I want to think about this too.
Well, because I was going to say Imagine, but I was like, no, I'm like only Imagine when I'm like kind of in like a sad place.
Yeah, that's fair. That's really fair. I feel like, We Can't Be Friends. It's so with Intro, End of the World, I immediately knew it was a favorite. With We Can't Be Friends, like, say another album comes, I can't tell if it's like recency bias of me wanting to put that in top 5 or if that's my true feelings, but I do think We Can't Be Friends is incredible as well.
I think that's partially why I stayed away from Eternal Sunshine, because of recency bias. If I had to pick something from Eternal Sunshine, probably Bi or Supernatural for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, it's such a new album. I don't know if I could like rank it somewhere yet.
Totally. No, I agree. I think, now that I'm looking, I always have to look at Sweetener because it is my favorite. I think Good Night and Go and Get Well Soon are both in my top as well.
Great song.
Top 10 for sure.
Oh, and Get Well Soon. I mean, the whole silence at the end. Excellent.
Yes. Okay, so actually, I want to explore that a little bit. I was taking notes on different specific pieces of media from Ariana that made you feel seen, especially like particularly on ones you would listen when you're feeling sad or like in sort of an emotional state. To prepare for this interview, like just the last hour, I hadn't yet watched the like part 2 of Zach saying in her interview about ahead of Eternal Sunshine. Actually, I think the part 2 came out after it came out, but she sort of breaks down each song. And I was really, I was really intrigued by the way she talked about particular songs. Like she talked about the song Bye and that being from her mom's sort of perspective and her parents' divorce. And she said like their strength is in goodbyes is something she said that I found really interesting. Another one I found that was really interesting is from Imperfect for You, which I think is one of her favorites from the album. And I do for Eternal Sunshine. That's one of my, I would say that's my, in my top 3 or 4 of that album. She talked about the lyric happy disaster and just how every like moment in life contains these sort of multitudes. Had you heard like her talk about those before? And if not, what do you think about those sort of perspectives?
No, I had, I know that interview exists. I think I saw it was like an hour long or something. And I was like, I don't know.
Long.
I was like, I don't know if I can sit down and do this. So I was like, maybe at some other point in time, but I do need to watch it. I mean, The Imperfect for You does, that makes sense to me why she would love that song. I think Bye is interesting that's from her perspective, from her mom about the divorce, because she doesn't, unless I'm wrong, she doesn't talk about her parents' divorce very often.
Right. I don't think so.
I can't remember a lot of interviews or where she's talking about. I mean, she talks about her dad. She talks about them separately. But that's interesting to me because it's like clearly she has some trauma built up around that divorce because I believe they got divorced when she was a kid. That's interesting, though. That's interesting. I do need to watch it. I have no further comment on the interview because I haven't watched it, but I'm sure it's great.
No, I think you're on point too talking about I don't think she talks about it often. And I think the only other like sort of like any semblance of discussing it that I've seen is obviously in Thank You Next. She talks about like because she grew from the trauma, like about her mom and walking down the aisle with her mom. But then like in concert she changed the lyrics, so she doesn't she says like, oh, my dad is really awesome or whatever. So yeah, it's interesting the way she sort of like talks about those and puts little, it's like I feel like it's just so raw. It really goes back to what we're talking about. It's like these emotions can be so ever changing. And I think with this album, I know at one point and I know a lot of artists have to do this recently, but it's like, oh, don't like go for my ex or whatever, just because I have these songs sort of that may be about him and may not or whatever. But I really love the way that music allows one to explore that, and it can be ever changing. It doesn't have to be so, okay, here's my point of view and it's going to stay that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think too, I mean, we talked about Get Well Soon and Sweetener as a whole being, especially after the Manchester bombing. I feel like I want to talk about specifically about grief for a second and talking about her experience and anything you feel comfortable sharing about your own personal experience. But Ariana's work through a lens of grief, I think, Sweetener is really informed by that PTSD. And she in Get Well Soon, for those who don't know, the last, I forget, it's the length of the song, right? That indicates how many, or it was like the date and then how many people passed away was, I think, I forget the exact number, but I should have looked that
isn't
up
it like
before, but
5? Oh, I'm gonna search it up, but I think it's like a 5-minute 12-second song. Oh
yeah, because that's the date that I believe the bombing occurred at her concert.
5/19,
but I'm not
5/19.
5/19. Okay.
5/19.
Yeah, and she sort of, all of Sweetener is talking about, getting out of this place, no tears left to cry, which is, I don't think we said on the recording, but the shirt you're wearing today says no tears left to cry. But, and then of course, Thank You Next is really informed by this ending of her relationship with Pete, which who knows how much of that was someone she really thought she would be with, or how much of it was sort of as she's still navigating grief and mental health issues and putting her all in this sort of relationship, but then also losing Mac Miller, someone she was with for years and years and years. Do you, like, what do you, as someone who's a big fan of her, how do you look at the way she sort of talks about and navigates grief, and how does it resonate with you?
Sure. Also, the 5:22. I don't want anyone to come for us. 5:22. No, it's interesting because I don't think you have to have experienced intense grief to understand her music and what she's saying. Like, I think even if you haven't lost a loved one, or, you know, grief doesn't necessarily have to be death, loss of a relationship, loss of a friend, you know, um, I think you can listen to Get Well Soon and still feel that emotional pull that she's putting into that song. I think Ariana has always done this amazing thing of being able to create music that has deeper meaning than just being a pop song, while making it accessible to anyone that listens. Right? You can be 10, you can be 40 and be listening to the same song of Ariana's and have two completely different reactions to that music, right? Maybe that song resonates with you because she has a lyric in there about loss of Mac Miller, or the relationship with Pete Davidson, or, you know, her finding Ethan Slater. You know, or you could be younger and just think that the lyrics are catchy. That's the beauty of Ariana to me, is that it expands to any age group, any demographic. For me personally, you know, it's like I said, I kind of, certain albums really fit with certain time periods of in my life. You know, Sweetener was for me that loss of childhood to an extent, because I graduated college and I immediately moved to LA, and all of a sudden I was an adult. You know, and of course I was 21, I was already an adult for a couple of years before that, but not at home. I went to school in New York. I'm from New York. I was on my own for the first time. So it was that feeling of losing that childhood, you know. So I held on to that album, which was a more upbeat album about coming into the unknown and just being happy, trying to kind of take from that happiness and apply it to my own life. Whereas then Thank You Next came out, and by that point, I, because I believe Imagine came out February of 2019. um
Mm-hmm. Feels right.
I'm like throwing a lot of dates out on this podcast that I have no idea if they're right or not, but I'm just
Oh, you know
remembering.
what? It was December
Okay,
2018.
okay? That's even better.
I'm like weirdly good with dates, so I was like just trying to verify. I think it was just because I was at a holiday party for work. I'm pretty sure.
Maybe when I'll say this, I probably associated with February of 2019 more than anything, because February
Mm-hmm.
of 2019 I had lost both my grandparents within the same year. So that
Mm-hmm.
was the first time that I had lost people that were truly close to me, and it all happened within a year of each other. And then I was also in a job that I was miserable at, that I was getting berated at 24/7, and I was just miserable. And I distinctly remember I would listen to Imagine every single day. And not because I was happy. It was not a song that brought me into that happiness, but it was a song that was sad, but it felt so right in the moment. It felt so right for me in that moment, because it was like, imagine a world like that, right? I think that's the lyric. And it was that kind of thing where I was personally imagining a world where, you know, I wasn't experiencing this loss. I I wasn't at a job I didn't like. I wasn't in a city that I hadn't found myself in yet. You know, trying to look past all of it into the brighter side. You know, kind of still holding on to Sweetener a little bit. Then obviously, you know, she releases all of Thank You Next, and the album is completely different from Imagine, with the exception of, you know, like Ghostin' and stuff like that. But, you know, to have an album that has Imagine on it, and that's the song that I'm holding on to in December to February 2019, that she drops Thank You Next, and it's Break Up With Your Girlfriend on Board, or Fake Smile. You know, it was just this album. And I think that's why anytime someone asks me, like, what's my favorite Ariana album, I really do think about Thank You Next, because I was in a really dark place when that album came out. You know, emotionally, mentally, you know, losing loved ones, losing, you know, my home because I left, you know, not having good job, not really having any friends in LA. It just felt like I had so much loss and not a lot of gains. Um, so when that album all dropped at once, it was kind of that moment of, you know, put on a fake smile and get through it, like make it better for yourself. So that album really resonates with me, especially because it just came out at, again, just the perfect time for me personally.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, not just with Ariana music, but media in general. What do you, amid grief, especially sort of those really raw moments,
Hmm.
what is it like, what media do you personally look for? Like what do you want it to also be grieving alongside you? Do you like a distraction? Do you like feeling it? Like
Hmm.
what is it for you?
I mean, I'm very much a proponent, and I will say I've become better at this because my girlfriend is very much the person that does this. Um, of trying to sit in the feeling that you're feeling instead of trying to hide it. At the time, um, I was not like that. I did not. I hadn't met my girlfriend yet, so I was distracting myself with anything. It was, but primarily my favorite show of all time is Boy Meets World, and there is an episode of Boy Meets World called A Long Walk to Pittsburgh, Part 1 and 2, where Topanga moves to Pittsburgh. It's one of the very emotional episodes of this '90s sitcom. Um, but I watched that episode probably on repeat, like multiple times a week. It was just finding television that made me feel more happy, that made me feel almost nostalgic. I found myself going back to like a lot of nostalgia. So, listening to In Sync, listening to old music that I loved, watching TV, even, YouTube videos. And then, of course, that was the TikTok boom, right? So then TikTok comes along and I'm distracting myself with TikTok. Now, I probably wouldn't do all that. I probably try to actually face it head on a little bit more. But at the time, I was numbing myself, just trying to figure out how I can get through it on my own.
Right. I feel like nostalgia is such a powerful tool. And I think that's something I often, even like amid the initial sort of loss of when my mom passed away, and even
Mhm.
up until now, even though it's been 2 years, but it still feels so raw. I think I often turn to things that'll be nostalgic. And for me, a huge show, which I'm sure I'll talk about thousands of times in some capacity on the Grief and Media Project, but Never Have I Ever, because I think
Mm,
it's that perfect balance of talking about grief, and this high schooler is facing grief, but also she's a high schooler and it's like the coming of age, and it's like the nostalgia of like first relationships and whatever friendships and all these things. And then it's also sort of a distraction too, because she's wild and has these antics that are just
right.
just silly to watch and fun to watch. So yeah, I really love that you said that about a nostalgia, because I think that resonates with me, and I'm sure a lot of people as well.
Hmm. Absolutely. There is one movie that I watched that I watched Click, the Adam Sandler movie, so
Uh-huh.
many times. I don't know if you've ever seen Click,
No,
but
I haven't.
okay, this is like not a great movie by any means, but for anyone that is listening and has seen it, I feel like they will understand this. Like there's a scene at the end which is like just so emotional. Like I don't even know how to describe it. Like he's on the floor dying, like in the rain, screaming for his family. And for some reason, I watched that movie once during that period back in 2019,
Uh-huh.
and it became nostalgic for no reason. Like I didn't see that movie when it came out, but then I would watch that specific clip, which was weirdly, I guess a good word for it is sadistic, but I would watch that movie like all the time. Um, and I bring that up just because it's like there's so many weird things when it comes to grief that you end up doing that like I look back on and I'm like, why was I watching that movie and that specific scene 1,000 times, like once a
Right.
night? Like there was no reason for that. I could have easily have put on something equally as maybe not good, like Jimmy Fallon, and probably had like a similar effect, you know? So
Right.
just it's very weird how, people react to grief.
Definitely. I think so too. I think it's I love what you said too about like something being nostalgic, even though it doesn't necessarily like play a part in your past particularly, but it has that feel.
Mhm.
I think nostalgic is such a big tool, and this is going back to Ariana a little, but like I literally had the sweetener sessions like open on my computer. I just closed it because I didn't want it to interfere with our like recording. Having I had to close like 50 tabs. But it's just like stuff like that. It's like you really find that nostalgia and that joy in some capacity, and I think it can be I think a lot of getting through grief is having to be distracted in ways,
Mhm.
because what else can you do? Like, not entirely ignoring it, but needing those distractions, I think is a really good, I don't know. It's a powerful tool for a reason, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I think you have to have distractions. I think then this is a larger commentary on just society and kind of hustle culture, right? We've kind of been conditioned to an extent of like you're constantly going and going and going. Like every moment of your life has to be somehow productive.
Right.
And the reality is that's just not true. No one can be productive 24/7. And especially in those moments, for me specifically, I remember feeling like, oh my God, I'm just sitting on the couch every night doing nothing. And everyone around me is succeeding, and I'm was glued to Instagram watching people's stories. They're on vacation, they're posting their successes. And that was where I really started to remove myself like from social media. Like, then eventually I got into TikTok. But, you know, eventually now like I'm at the point where it's, I barely post on Instagram. I don't post on Twitter. I have very little social media presence. Um, but it was one of those things where I needed the distraction. But because I had been conditioned that this is what being in LA was, working in entertainment, like you had to be go, 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 it was
Mhm.
almost making things worse. And by not allowing myself to just enjoy those distractions, I almost felt like I was prolonging the grieving period
Right.
as time went on. It made it longer.
Definitely. No, I love that perspective. But this has been so wonderful. It has been so great to talk about Ariana and to get into the grief of it all. Do you have anything else you would like to share regarding grief, Ariana, anything, any media at all?
No, no. I think if you haven't listened to Eternal Sunshine, listen to it. If you don't like Eternal Sunshine, I encourage you to listen to her other albums because there is one out there that you will like.
Wait, okay, I actually have to ask one more question.
Yeah, go
How
for
do
it.
you what would your top 3 albums be? Like if you
Oh
had to
man.
give me a final answer.
Probably, no particular order. I would probably say Sweetener, Yours Truly, and then it's a tie between Thank You Next and Dangerous Woman for me.
Okay. Okay. I like that ranking. Yeah, mine would
Yeah.
be, and mine is in order: Sweetener number 1,
Hmm.
Eternal Sunshine number 2. Oh shoot. See, that's where it gets hard. I think I would say I think I would say Dangerous Woman 3, but I'm actually between that and Yours Truly.
I get it. Look, Dangerous Woman is a great album, and I would say realistically, Sweetener is my number one. It's her most complete album, and we've talked about this
Right.
over Instagram. Sweetener is her most complete album. I think it is hard to argue against that. I think it's hard to argue that's not her best album. So it's probably number one for
Definitely.
me too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on here. This has been absolutely incredible. I hope everyone is now streaming everything they need to stream when it comes to Ariana. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thank you so much for listening to Grief and Media. If you liked this episode, please rate and review. Check out our media database, newsletter, essays, and more at griefandmedia.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at griefandmedia. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Love you all. I'll see you next time.